My name is Diane Fine. Thank you guys all for coming to this event today. I know it's a beautiful Sunday out here. I'm guessing the people in LA, it's a beautiful Sunday there too. And you have other things to do. So I really appreciate that you came to this today to hear Ken Kwapis speak. My name is Diane Fine. I'm a screenwriting instructor here at the Muse Writers Center, and I'm a film professor at Old Dominion University, which is also here in Norfolk, Virginia, where I relocated, I think it's 6 years ago now, time flies, from Los Angeles. And I'd like to welcome you to the event, this event, which is a virtual Q&A with director Ken Kwapis. Before I introduce Ken, I just want to say to please put any questions you have in the chat. There's also a button on the bottom that says Q&A. You can put them in there as well, because people are writing me funny notes. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. And I'm going to right now, super quick, post into the chat the link to Ken's book. Please support your independent booksellers, not the mega retailers. And then I'm putting it in here, and I will talk about that in a moment. So I did it through bookshop.org, which to me is a great way to promote independent booksellers rather than mega retailers. I've said that twice now, haven't I? Okay, by way of introduction, I can't stress enough how unusual it is to be a director who is successful in both film and television. This is extremely rare, especially in the olden days when we didn't have streaming services and we actually had movies that were made that weren't superhero involved in theaters, which I know is no longer the case. So Ken Kwapis has forged this very unique path over the past 30 or so years. He's directed 11 feature films, including He's Just Not That Into You, starring Jennifer Aniston, Bradley Cooper, Scarlett Johansson, Ben Affleck, Jennifer Connelly, cast of thousands, Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants with America Ferrera and Blake Lively, A Walk in the Woods with Robert Redford and Nick Nolte, Big Miracle with John Krasinski and Drew Barrymore, License to Wed with Robin Williams and Mandy Moore, The Beautician and the Beast with Fran Drescher and Timothy Dalton, Dunstan Checks In with Faye Dunaway, Jason Alexander, He Said, She Said with Kevin Bacon and Elizabeth Perkins, which was co-directed with Marissa Silver, and Vibes with Jeff Goldblum and Cyndi Lauper. So you can see he's directed a few famous actors. That's why I included that list of stars. He also helped launch 9 TV series, including seminal shows such as The Office, Freaks and Geeks, and The Larry Sanders Show, as well as Santa Clarita Diet, Black AF, One Mississippi, Happy-ish, Outsourced, The Bernie Mac Show, and Malcolm in the Middle. In all, he has directed episodes of over 20 different series. And Ken's book, which was published last year by St. Martin's Press, is called But What I Really Want to Do Is Direct. Lessons from a Life Behind the Camera. And that's the link I put in the chat. If you would like to read it, I highly recommend it. It is hilarious and wonderful. And I think a lot can be learned for writers from this book, even though it's technically about directing. It's a lot about Ken's experiences in Hollywood with a lot of really great writing advice, especially the chapter about the objective correlative, which I will ask you about shortly. Where was I? So he talks about his experiences in the book with dealing with studio notes, unwanted feedback, taking meetings, coping with reviews, braving test screenings, dealing with larger than life personalities that often populate Hollywood, and everything in between. And every writer should read this wonderful descriptions of the films that inspired him as well. He does very long, deep dives into his favorite films. And for a writer, I think it's a wonderful, very insightful. So I'm thrilled to have you join us today, Ken. And thank you so much for giving your time to the Muse.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for mentioning the work I've done. One tiny thing I want to say is I didn't actually help launch Freaks and Geeks. I worked on it, but I didn't.
Sorry. I put that in the wrong category, didn't I?
But I'm very happy to be here and talk shop with you and your fellows.
Thank you.
Is fellows an PC word nowadays? Is there a more woke version of fellows these days?
Oh, how about fellers? And it's just sort of silly
That's
sounding.
pretty good. I like that. So I see
I
someone.
don't know. It's hard for me.
Oh,
It's hard for me to keep track of
no, somebody just gave the answer, cohort.
Oh, cohort. Perfect.
Okay. Although
Oh,
I
and
think fellows is gender neutral, but
oh, okay. Michael said that. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Haley. Oh, yeah. Haley's on it. I always count on the younger people to tell me these things and keep me apprised of what's going on in the culture, since I'm one of the olds. Thank you. Aisha says fellows is fine. Gender neutral enough. Okay. Thanks, Aisha. Okay, so I have already gotten a few questions from some of my students, so I'm going to launch right in. I also have questions, of course, 1 million, and I'm sure I'm going to get a whole bunch in here, but just FYI for everyone, we're only going to take up 1 hour of Ken's precious, valuable time. So we'll end by 5 o'clock. Okay, so for the starters, I just was raving about the objective correlative thing. So should we just start with that? You talking about that? This is like the best. I want to rip out the 14-page chapter. Xerox. Well, I guess that's not legal.
Well,
and every student read it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's a concept that comes from the world of literary criticism. It's not something, the phrase objective correlative is not something I'd ever heard in film school. And what it kind of means is that an object, for instance, a prop, a piece of wardrobe, the space in your scene can actually, kind of carry the meaning of the scene. Like a prop. I'm going to give you a very quick example. Like if you are a fan of the show Breaking Bad, well, Walter White's, pork pie, is that what it's called? A pork pie hat. Basically, you can trace the arc of that character's journey with a hat. And there are a lot of examples in films and television where objects tell the story, where literally an object is used throughout a story to sort of reveal the theme or again to help tell the main character's journey. It's not an easy concept to communicate, but once you kind of get into it, it's kind of great. I mean, I would just say for all of you out there who are writers and directors, just start to think about how a prop can tell your story, how a hat, how the space in the room, how the way people relate in space actually can kind of reveal something about your characters.
That's great. And one of my big things with my students always is, visual storytelling. It's not a play. We don't tell stories all with dialogue in screenwriting or television writing, and how this is a visual metaphor for things, or it can convey emotion. One of my students even just brought up the other night in Tuesday's class, the wedding ring scene in how much important emotional weight the wedding ring was given in Crazy Rich Asians.
Sure.
And
Absolutely.
things like that. Like you can oftentimes really put so much of the emotion on an object where people couldn't express it maybe as well.
Well, I'll give you an example that I mentioned in the book that comes from the show The Office, because I directed the pilot of The Office. And one of my jobs was trying to figure out the layout of the Dunder Mifflin bullpen, the place where they all work. And there are a lot of questions like, should everyone work in cubicles? Should it be an open plan? And I also needed to figure out how people related, how their desks related. So with the characters of Pam and Jim, I mean, clearly their relationship is central to the show, and it's a relationship that's fraught with tension. They're two people who are attracted to each other, but she's has a boyfriend and she's going to get engaged, and so I had to figure out whether or not there was a way in how those two characters sat in the room that could somehow reinforce the tension between them. So I came up with this idea that John Krasinski's character would always be sitting perpendicular to, I'm going to act him out here. So I'm looking this way. And meanwhile, behind him, actually, is that right? Yeah. Behind him, Jenna Fisher, who plays Pam, is always staring right at him. so that John, in order to look at her, needs to make an effort. He needs to turn. And so there are a lot of interesting things that we discovered just with the way those two people related in space, that you could create a shot where John's in profile in the foreground. Is he aware that Jen is looking at him, or is he pretending that he's not aware? So anyways, it just, again, it all came from thinking about how the characters relate in space and what that relationship could convey in terms of the emotional content.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think something that's important, writers need to also sort of choreograph the shot, right, as they're writing.
I think that, I mean, again, I don't feel it's necessary to say what the shots are, mm-hmm. But anytime that you can create a sense of the space that the characters are in, if you can somehow visualize it or visualize the dynamic between the characters, if you're trying to suggest that someone has power over another person, can you describe in the scene description or put them in some situation where visually one person is above another, for example. You can't always do that, but when you can. By the way, speaking of thinking visually, I really urge you, all of you, to occasionally just watch a film or a TV show without the sound. Just turn the sound off. Watch a whole film. Watch a film you haven't seen. Watch an entire film and try and figure out how much information is being conveyed without the benefit of dialogue. Same with shows. Sometimes, I mean, I remember trying to do this once, and nothing against Gilmore Girls, but I was watching an episode of Gilmore Girls without the sound. I couldn't tell anything that was going on because
it's all dialogue.
It's just a gab fest. So.
Yeah. It's very true. Yeah, and that's valid. I mean, some shows are more like a stage play than others, but in general, I try to ask the students to, even at the end, like go through their script with a fine-tooth comb and literally every scene, what could I do visually, or what could I, not have dialogue?
Well, another thing that I didn't really write about this, but I've been thinking about it a lot, is to kind of write with all five senses. Mm. So like, can the scene description can it be tactile? Mm. Can body language help tell the story? Can you smell something? Well, you can't smell something literally on TV or in a movie theater, but a reader can. If you're reading a script and you describe a smell that's really, affecting the action, that's fantastic.
I sometimes yell at my students, no smelling. You can't smell, but my point is, have the actor or the character react to the smell. If just like I smell, trash, over there, that doesn't mean anything to the audience. You can't smell it.
It's also like if you have a scene that you in order to create a certain, to heighten the emotion of the scene, let's say you decide in the scene description to say that half the light bulbs in the room are out. So that's like a weirdly dark room. Suddenly that scene feels very different when you're reading it. If a scene takes place in a restaurant and in the scene description you say that you can, hear the cooking and the, all the hubbub in the kitchen, that noise, that's your soundtrack for your scene. Mm-hmm. So suddenly, again, the reader is sort of involved, not just visually, but again, the other senses.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Excellent. Thank you for that. That's great. I'm gonna steal that. Okay, so the other thing, and I know a lot of people want to talk about business sort of aspect, and we will get to that, I promise. But I just thought we'd start with more of the artistic or creative aspects of the writing. But I wanted to say, you noted in your book that thinking on your feet was one of the most important traits in the director. So I was going to ask you, what you would say are the most important traits necessary for a writer?
Wow. Well, I think that, I think it's, again, there's so many different kinds of screenplays and screenplay writers, but for me, what's important is that as a writer, that you don't skim the surface of your scene. Really get under the skin of the scene. Sometimes I feel like if you can describe the scene without any dialogue, let dialogue be like the icing on the cake. You know, what you want to do is find out what's going on underneath. And what does that mean practically? Well, it means that if you take the time to get to know your characters on a deep level, give them histories, think about where they've come from, where they just were before the scene started, and where they were, you know, before the films or TV shows started, what'll happen is they will start to behave for you. They will actually start behaving, and you're there to kind of like watch them and transcribe what they're doing. But in order to get there, you have to work from the inside out. We've all read wonderful scripts or seen wonderful shows that have this kind of lovely, glistening dialogue, but there's not a heck of a lot going on underneath. For me, what I get excited about is a writer, and you can feel it when you're reading, a writer who's connected to something that's, you know, beneath the surface.
Excellent. Sorry, I have the crazy boys making noise. I hope you can't hear that.
No.
Okay. I have a house full of boys, by way of explanation, watching football downstairs, and whenever anybody scores, okay, you're going to hear it in the background, a lot of yelling. Anyway, sorry, that sounds
okay. So if you're writing this as a scene, that's a great thing to add at the top of the scene. There's like a football game in the background and a lot of yelling throughout the whole scene.
Perfect. Everybody put that in your scripts right now. Excellent. Okay. And then also I was curious if do you choose or not choose projects based on the quality of the writing? Like, do you like it's some big thing or it's got a star, but you're like, I don't like the writing, or how important is the writing to you in your projects?
Well, I mean, for me, the best work I've done has been work where when I read the script, I felt like I could see something of myself in some of the characters. So, and again, it's a tribute to a good writer that you kind of recognize yourself in the story or in the characters. And it doesn't matter, you know, for instance, Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, a film I'm very proud of. I mean, I'm not a teenage girl, but when I read the script, I felt like the emotional issues that each of the four main characters were dealing with, I was like, oh, been there, done that. You know, I felt like I was able to put myself in their shoes. So that's when I feel like that's when I feel confident as a director. So,
but were you able to put yourself in their pants?
I
Maybe
I don't think
wrong.
I can. You can ask that question, but if I answer it, I'll get in trouble.
Exactly. You're going viral, buddy. Okay. So I'll stop asking questions because clearly I'm not doing well. No.
By the way, can I add something to that? Because
yes, please.
when I did get the job to direct it, Variety actually had a headline that said, Kwapis to wear Warner's pants.
Love it. That's a classic Variety headline. I hope you've got that pasted up somewhere, enlarged. Excellent. Questions I'll just go to some of my students, if that's okay. My wonderful writer student, Katie Anderson, says, hi, and thanks for being here. I'm an older writer and I need every break I can get. I belong to 2 different writers groups and a lot of people enter scripts to contests and the blacklist, etc. Are these legit? What are your opinions of these contests? Thank you.
I can't speak about all contests. I can certainly tell you that the blacklist is worth submitting your writing to. And on a couple of occasions, I have pursued a blacklist script because they generally are quite exciting and they're oftentimes not the kind of things that studios will develop. So I would say 100% yes. I mean, I would say there's probably no contest that's not helpful in some level, you know, so, but people pay attention to them. They definitely do. And
there's sort of levels of them, like the Nickel Fellowship, and then it sort of goes down from there, or the blacklist. Well, I think there's a lot of different things, but I do think that those fellowships and contests, and I guess the blacklist is not really a contest. It's just sort of a you know, scripts are singled out for, and people in the industry definitely pay attention to those things. They definitely do. Okay. And do you have any comment to her about like ageism, or, I mean, I know that is a problem.
Yeah, but I personally, I don't feel it's not as much a problem with writers, I feel, as it is with other craftspeople, and actors obviously deal with it in a more, in a very obvious way. But I feel like I mean, one of the great things, I don't need to, this goes without saying, but I'll say it anyways, is, when you're starting out, you don't really have a lot of life experience to draw from when you're telling stories. So when I started off, I was most of my ideas, and I'm not a writer, but when I did try my hand at writing, most of my ideas came from other movies. So I feel like just the opposite. I feel like, as you gather more life experience, you can draw upon more things that you have encountered and seen and been involved with. It's just going to make your writing richer. How could it not? So.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with you, because also I'm old. So because we brought up the thing before about fellows, my student Alyssa said, speaking of woke language, do you ever find yourself stumped when writing, making sure you don't offend anyone in your audience? That's good.
That's a great one. Well, I think that, I mean, I feel like, well, first of all, let me try and answer it from a director's point of view. I mean, I do feel that there's a lot of sensitivity, more so than ever on a set, when it comes to how a director not only directs actors, but oversees a crew. And this is not quite answering the student's question, but I do feel like it's really critical for me to create an atmosphere in which people feel respected, acknowledged, and again, that's crew and cast, and so I feel like I mean, there's a lot of, whether it comes down to making sure you get people's pronouns right, or whether it's just sort of basic courtesy. I think that a crew will want to come to work if they feel acknowledged. The cast will step up and bring their A game if you're not treating them like puppets. So, I mean, I kind of feel like it's so basic, but I think that one very positive outcome of sort of things like the Me Too movement have been, in terms of being a director, is just kind of forces you to be on your toes a little more in terms of how you talk to people. So.
And I hope it trickles down outside of Hollywood too, and in a construction office or whatever, wherever anyone.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's the positive to it. Thank you. And then, oh, this is a great question. Do you think it's possible to over detail a script or a scene, like putting too much detail in? If so, how and where do you draw the line? Because my students often ask, because I'm like, well, you need to give a sense, like the lights are out, or like, a few things we've talked about. But then I also see them where they have too much, like her jeans are from this and her shoes are from this, like how do you like describe that line?
Well, I think that, I mean, I feel like what's going to really have an impact on the reader is when you're writing with, using emotional language to describe things. And again, let me try and answer that question talking about directing actors, because a lot of the things that I try and do when I'm working with actors is identify what their character's goal is in a scene, and then give them tactics to achieve the goal. And what I mean by tactics are things that are I try and use active verbs. And so, for instance, if I'm doing a scene where, let's say that a character needs $1,000, and let's say that the character is a woman trying to get someone to lend her $1,000, where there's like 18 different active verbs you can give the actor to try and achieve that goal. You can beg, you can insist, you can cajole, so there's a lot of, so I would just say that when you're trying to get this on paper, just make sure that you're activating your characters. I don't really, now sometimes you do have a particular character for whom the way they look is really the key to the character. I'm not saying that's not the case, but it would be, it's more interesting if you can, kind of keep, for me, it's more compelling if I'm involved because of, how active they are in trying to achieve their goal. Now, can you over detail the scene description? Oh yeah, and it's really easy to, but I also feel like you don't want to just turn everything into minimalist, 1 and 2 word sentences either. But I would just say, think about, I mean, you could do a lot worse than taking an acting class, or they have, I don't have the copy in front of me, but you can buy like an actor's like glossary of active verbs. It's just a book of verbs. Yeah, it's really amazing. It's great. So
I think we need that.
I mean, also you'll find that when you're writing a script, that oftentimes people have actions that are similar scene to scene, and you obviously just want to make sure that the reader's not getting tired of or feeling like it's repetitious in terms of the writing. So I think that's
Great answer.
that question.
That's good.
So,
and it's sort of
can I add one more thing?
Yes, of course.
Here's a tricky thing. So I think for people who are going to buy your script, sometimes those are not actors or creative people. Nothing against them. They're not creative people. So I do feel occasionally that they do need parenthetical indications about how a piece of dialogue is being delivered, but use those sparingly. And once you get that script sold and you're making it, a good actor will just cross every one of those out. Nothing against the writer, but it's the actor's job to figure that out. But I do feel like you do, this is going to sound a little bit, I don't know, condescending towards executives, but I do think you need to hold the hand of readers who aren't necessarily creative people a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I urge my students not to use them too much, but because you should try to have it obvious from the way you wrote the dialogue that it's sarcasm or under their breath, or but sometimes you do need them to make it clear.
Well, it's also, there could be a piece of scene description that literally describes something, some physicality, some movement, turns with a start, as opposed to putting that in a parenthetical,
Right. So, and also sort of along these lines, my student Liz says, how do you know when you've revised your script enough? How do you know when it's done?
Well, let's see if I can quote this correctly. There's a famous quote from the French poet Mallarmé, who said that a poem is never finished, it's only abandoned.
Oh,
so I think you just keep going. There's always, it's never going to be 100% done. I do think, though, it's important at a certain point to, and this is a longer conversation, I'd love to dip our toes into it a little bit. You want to share it with somebody. You want to get some feedback. And obviously you want to give feedback to your fellow writers as well. And I just have 2 rules of thumb I'd love to share with you about that. And the first is, when when a work is in process, then I think it's fair to, to give criticism and feedback. But I feel that once a film is done or a TV show is done, you should shut up. There's no point in talking about it anymore. All you should do is congratulate the person on having accomplished it. There's no point in giving your 2 cents anymore once it's finished. So the second rule of thumb, these are just for me, other people may disagree, that this is an important one when it comes to feedback, is make sure that when you give someone feedback, that you understand their intentions. It's like so easy if Diane, if you gave me a script about a family and the main characters are the parents, and my big piece of feedback was, oh, wouldn't it be great if it was told from the child's point of view? Well, that is not that is not the intention of the script. So it's really a non-productive bit of feedback. So it's like, and I often, if I'm in discussion with a writer, I will often say, what were you I relate, what were you intending here? Because here's, and then sort of use that as a way to sort of focus your piece of your feedback, even if it's highly critical. Even if you say, you know what, I don't think you're succeeding in the thing you want to do. But it's like, I'm not saying, you know, change it, throw it out. I'm saying, here's your intention, but I don't know if you're actually achieving the thing you're intending yet. So.
And do you feel like it's different working with writers of features and TV? I mean, like when you have TV, do you ever have to like work with multiple writers, or is it usually one writer's assigned to that episode?
Well, I think that, you know, it depends. In television, it depends. If you're a kind of a director for hire on a show, more often than not, you won't have much contact with the writers. You will have contact with the showrunner, and the showrunner, who obviously represents the writers in general. And but if you're helping to launch a show, if you're working on the pilot, then more, I would say, you're very involved with the writers in terms of you're setting the style of a show, you're setting the look, you're involved with casting. So you're very, you know, it's a different experience. You know, oftentimes in the feature world, and again, the feature world is so different now than it was when, you know, when you and I got started. Like, but over the course of my career, oftentimes I'd work on a feature film where the writer, the original writer, wasn't even there, because a lot of times, and this is just a weird aspect of the Hollywood feature film industry, is that, you know, the original writer works on it for a while, but then it's rewritten by various other people, and then then a director's hired. And by that point, the original writer is like, you know, somewhere else. So
On their four movies later.
I know.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And then my student Haley says, how does genre impact the way you direct? Do certain shots, props, or tropes, and how to effectively use them turn up? Oh, that's interesting.
Well, let's see. I'm trying to think of a genre that I've worked in. Well, here's I'll talk about this. I think that I'll say that workplace comedy is a genre I've worked in a bunch. So a show like The Office, or a show like Outsourced, or a show like The Larry Sanders Show are all essentially workplace stories. And I mean, again, tropes is a negative word. I would say that there are maybe certain traditions that you can be mindful of. I would say, for instance, one of the traditions of workplace comedies on TV is that essentially a group of people, characters, are thrown together in a situation that they wouldn't normally be together, were it not for the fact that they have to make a living in one space. So the idea then is that, how do they form a working unit? How do they form a family? And they are not family. So I would say a good workplace comedy, the dynamic between a bunch of people who would otherwise not be caught dead together, is what gives it its energy. Is that a
That's
trope?
great.
Well, it's certainly something you see in a lot of shows. I guess a trope means that it's not done with much originality, but again, I think that there's nothing wrong with sort of understanding why certain traditions persist.
Excellent. Yeah, traditions, I would call that. Yeah, definitely. Great. Calavan, another one of my ODU students, says, I tend to get writer's block a lot of time writing. So how would you recommend getting over writer's block?
Wow. Well, there's a lot of things to do. And one of them, I mean, these are all personal things, so you can take them or leave them. I actually feel that steering clear of the internet is helpful during your day. I feel like if you can do your writing before you need to, log on and check your, email or texts or Instagram, I think that always helps. I feel like once I've kind of, gotten exposed to social media or emails for the day, my mind is full of distractions. So that's just a small thing. I mean, and I also feel this is I do feel that taking a walk in the middle of your writing day is hugely helpful. And also it's sometimes helpful to actually move and literally put your laptop or whatever you're writing on, notepad, whatever you're using, just move to a different part of the room, stare at a different wall. It's like, it seems so simple, but actually it can just kind of mix things up in a good way.
This is why I recently bought a hammock. It's like, oh, get to do some nature writing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. Michael, the head of the Muse, who you met before, asks, so embarrassing, is there somewhere where we can see yours and Diane's student films from USC?
Oh, well,
No.
I don't have a good answer for that. I don't honestly know. But
I have seen your student film. Awesome.
I would say I haven't looked at it in a while, but I'm very proud of my so-called 480 film. But it's a good question. We'll find out.
Okay, we'll have to do some sleuthing, internet sleuthing to see. Okay, but he did a really amazing thing, which I think is unusual. His student film was redoing of a Mozart opera, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, here's at USC, where Diane and I and Michael all went. Sort of the peak of the production curriculum was you got to shoot a 20+ minute film with sound, and that was not everything before that had sync sound. So a lot of the students, given the chance to direct a short film with sync sound, got super excited about the idea of actors talking, dialogue, of course. And I remember at the time maybe feeling a little bit perverse. Wouldn't it be great to do one of these films with no talking? In fact, wouldn't it be great to do a film with people singing? And at USC, and I'm sure it's the same at most schools, but you couldn't simply decide to use a popular song that's copyrighted. You had to abide by the rules, and the rules are, if you wanted to use a piece of music, it had to be in the public domain. So a friend of mine was getting his master's degree in conducting in the music department, and he said, why don't we look at the operatic literature? Well, I didn't know much of anything about opera, but he directed me to like a short one act that Mozart wrote that we brazenly updated and made a
with
film.
Nuns. Don't forget the with nuns part.
with nuns. I'll leave it at that.
It's really funny. It was great. And I know you're too humble to say that it won the Student Academy Award that year. And they showed it to me when I got to film school as like, you should make a film like this. They showed us like a few films and yours was one of them.
Well, I think the main thing, and this speaks to not only thinking visually, but also like how to think about your career. A lot of my classmates really were thinking so pragmatically. They thought, we need to make a film. We have this chance to make a 20-minute film. We need to impress prospective employers. We need to convince them that we can direct actors talking. And I remember just thinking, nah, not at all. No, that's not the way to think. And so again, it was partly out of perversity that I ended up doing something musical. So.
And you're the one who got to then go and do all those stars I mentioned.
Well,
and they didn't. And you didn't direct actors.
No.
No, it was really great. If we can find it, I wish we could find it. It's one of you sleuthy people out there. You can post
Maybe
it.
findable.
It's really funny. All right, moving on. I'm going away from the more general ones because we're kind of running out of time. Oh, this is a good idea. Hi, Taylor. Taylor, my former student, says, I'm an actress and I also direct and write. In school, I was encouraged that I should work towards putting myself in my work, which was a goal eventually, but I struggle with that idea. How do you think you best approach that without trying to juggle too many hats at once? Do you think you can be successful at like writing and directing, writing and acting in one project?
Well, we've seen plenty of people do it well. My hunch is that they probably have someone who, a confidant or, you know, an assistant or someone who can kind of keep an eye on them while they're in front of the camera. Because unless you're like super comfortable in front of the camera, I mean, it's not easy to direct oneself. And I don't have a really good answer for that, except that I feel like the same thing generally applies if you're directing another actor. You just need to be really straight with yourself and say, like, what is my care? What am I trying to achieve in this scene? Am I, you know, and make sure that you're giving yourself, you know, good tactics to achieve that goal. In a way, it's no different. It just means that you have to juggle a few more balls.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to one of my questions, because like a lot of my students are always just basically wondering how to make it in Hollywood. And, you know, do you look for an agent? Do you look for a manager? Do you paper the town with query letters? You know, do those, we talked about festivals and fellowships and all of those sort of things. I mean, do you have like, I know there's all these different paths, but I just don't even know if I can advise them. You know, a lot of them live here in Virginia, and do they need to move to Hollywood or New York? So what is just your general advice to writers who have maybe a script or two and want to know what to do next?
Well, first of all, for writers, things are changing. And I would say in the Zoom era, things are definitely changing for writers. I've worked on shows now where the writer's room, no one's in LA. So, I mean, I do think that now here's the truth, though, is that the business it's a social business. That doesn't mean you need to go to parties, but I do feel like there's value in being in the city where things are produced for a while, and just sort of, because I feel like a lot of what you need to do is start to build up a network of people, your peers. You're not going to, you know, you're not going to walk into land in Hollywood and suddenly be on the phone with people who are hugely established, but you're going to meet the people you're going to grow with. And then if you decide you'd rather not live here, ultimately, you've already sort of set up, again, you've created a cohort. So I think that it's important to spend a little time here. However, it is changing. I was in a writer's room where one of the writers was in Spain. One of them was on Long Island. It was like a crazy thing. Now, directing is different. Directors, you know, there's a couple of categories. You can be an independent filmmaker, and if you have the means to make independent films, then you don't need to be anywhere. You can do it wherever you want. You can edit in your room. But if you want to work in commercial film or television, at some point you need to kind of deal with Los Angeles. You have to deal with, a lot of directors end up spending a lot of their career working in other places, but the jobs, well, let's put it this way, the decisions about who's going to direct what are made in one place, Los Angeles. So.
Yeah, and even like, I've had friends over the years, you know, from film school or what have you, and move away. And then, oh, well, I'll just fly in for meetings. And like the meetings always get canceled 3 times. Like They never have the meeting the first time. And you've got plane tickets, like that's not going to work.
I mean, obviously there's tons of work happening in Atlanta, in New Orleans, in Vancouver, in New Mexico. There's a lot of places where production is big, but the people who get hired out of LA. The decisions about who's flying to Atlanta are made in LA. So.
Right. Excellent. My friend Kelly, hi Kelly, has a wonderful question. You've accomplished so much over the course of your career. Do you still set goals for yourself? And if so, what is the passion project you have yet to see come to fruition? I know what the answer to this is.
Well, I don't, you know what? I'm going to set aside the passion project part for a second, but in terms of goals, this kind of relates to, I would say, the big theme in the book that I wrote. And that is, over the years, I've had a lot of ups and downs. I've had a lot of meetings that didn't result in anything. I've made things that have been trashed by critics. So part of what I've come to learn over the years is that there are many things in this business that you don't have any control over. You don't have any control over whether reviewers like your work. You don't have any control over whether people go to the streaming service to watch your show. You don't have any control over who goes to the box. So you really don't have any control over any of that. The only thing you have control over is the process of making the thing itself. And by that I also include writing. So you have control over the process. So my goals in this right now for me are, how can I keep improving the process? And one of the things I've found, I'll just give you an example. I mentioned earlier, trying to create an atmosphere on the set where people feel respected. Okay, how can I improve that process? Can I learn a few more names of production assistants the next time I'm on the floor? So what's the way to keep improving the process? And what I've found is, if you become focused on process, like the ups and downs of the business ultimately will mean less and less. And it's going to be all about like being a process oriented person. Took me a few decades to figure this out. Now, one of my other goals, speaking of passion, is to remain passionate, because you're always like, oh my gosh, so many setbacks trying to get things off the ground, years of trying to do things. And so a lot of what's important for me, and I probably may not apply to all of you because you're just, you're starting, but it's important to sort of reconnect with your original passion now and then, and kind of remind yourself what got you super excited in the first place.
That's great. Thank you. Excellent. One of my students, this is a great question. If you had the chance to remake a classic film, which would it be and why?
Oh my God. Well, if it's a great film, I don't know if I'd want to remake it.
Okay, how about a crappy film?
I was going to say, there's a few of my own things I'd like to remake. Oh, well, how about this though? If I could visit the set and watch a great film being made.
Good one. Okay, what would that be? That's going to be hard to pick. Come on.
I would say, well, I do. And again, this is something I do actually write about a little bit. Like, if I could just hang out on the set of a Marx Brothers film made in the 30s and just watch, like, how did they do what they did? It's like,
and how could you not laugh? I mean, how did they keep everybody quiet? I would just look at just Harpo's face and I would just like bust up.
I mean, to me, if I could just, get to sit there on an apple box in the corner for an hour and a half watching them do a scene, that's enough for me. So.
Oh my gosh, that's a great answer. Great answer. That same student, Nico, also asks, what, in your opinion, is the most difficult part of, he said, of getting a film from pre-production into actual production. But I said, what do you mean? Because usually producers do that. And he said, vis-a-vis the writer, like in terms of rewriting or bringing in additional writers.
Oh, well, again, if you have a good relationship with if you're a director and you have a good relationship with the screenwriter, hopefully you won't be asked to bring someone else on. So I think that a lot of what's important, let's say you're working with a director. I'm going to answer this question as a director. If I'm working with a writer on a feature and we're in pre-production, some of the things that will come into play are, the writer's written a wonderful scene in a location that no one can find, or that's impractical, or the schedule is tight and therefore we can't do too many like night for night scenes because it's, it takes extra time and energy to light a big night scene. Can we change it to day? Or there's a table reading and we hear things that are not working in the table reading. and again, you don't have much time, but things need to be adjusted, pretty quickly. Or you cast an actor who's maybe skillful, but he or she just doesn't quite, have the sound of that character. What do? You have to kind of like take, what you have to kind of take what you've been given. You have to play the hand you've been dealt as best as possible. So that sometimes means the writer needs to kind of adjust things to suit the talents of a particular actor. There's a lot of things like that happen.
Right. And so let's say I have a student who has, a bunch of pilots,
Mm-hmm.
and they are submitting them here, and maybe they even get like a,
Mm-hmm.
management. Would you advise manager or agent to try to go after? Would you advise if they were approached by a manager, would you advise them hooking up with a manager?
Yeah, I think that a manager in this day and age can be as helpful, if not more helpful, than an agent. And I think that the classic, my understanding of a manager, and I have a manager, is that a manager oftentimes has a more kind of personal relationship with the client. An agent is there to kind of book you, but a manager can help kind of, in the best version of this, the manager helps you shape a career, so nothing against agents at all, but I think that don't be afraid of managers at all.
That might be a way for them to break in. They have a bunch of pilots. Let's say they wrote 3 pilots. They're sort of similar genre, like maybe finding a manager who could help you market yourself.
Now, once upon a time, I don't know what it's like now. You probably know this better than I do, Diane, but the thing you want to have under your arm is an original, script, like a pilot, and a spec based on a show that exists. So that still may be something that is worth for the writers out there, to think of a show that feels like if you just what's your fantasy show to be working on, well, then write an episode of it, write a spec episode of that show.
Yeah, that was a thing, and then it wasn't a thing, but now it's a thing again, right?
Since I'm not a writer, I don't know for sure, but it certainly has been a thing.
So you get stuff mostly that's already like greenlit, and you're going forward, or
no, I see things in fact, I would say by and large, I see things that are not greenlit.
Oh.
Now, well, more in television, if I see something, it tends to be on its way to being made. But in the feature world, whether it's studio films or independent films, I would say by and large, I see things long before they get a green light. And part of my job is to help get it a green light. So, and that means, enlisting someone to put together a budget just to see how much something will cost. And most importantly is trying to attach talent to certain roles that'll make it attractive to a financier.
Right. And so they're asking you to be attached, to work with the writers to develop the pilot, or.
Yeah. And oftentimes, for instance, I have been sent pilots that are not set up at any network or streaming service. And the goal is if I am excited enough, then I will work with the writer, and then it's often and then we'll submit it. Or, what's more often the case is a writer will approach me with an idea. So we don't develop a script, we just develop a pitch. And so that's a whole other, afternoon of conversation about, how to develop a really succinct pitch that represents the writer's idea, and do it in about 15 minutes, and then try and get out there and without cast attachments, just sometimes with me, the director, and the writer, just trying to get someone excited about it at the idea stage.
But that would be more established writers. Like, you wouldn't have like one of my students going on a pitch like that, would you?
I think that it's probably, no, I think that it can happen, but more often than not, I think that once you're a little more established, then you can kind of get into those rooms with just an idea. So I think, yeah, you're right. I think an original pilot or two, you
Mhm.
know.
And the same genre. I mean, you want to like focus like market yourself in a certain genre, or you want to show that you do different things.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like even though, I mean, that's really also a question about what you're excited to write about, because you can't fake it. You can't, you have to get excited about what you're writing. So if you are mostly excited about writing procedural dramas, cop dramas, then do it. I mean, you don't need to throw in a half-hour, comedy just to show have some, but at the same time, um, I feel like you also shouldn't pigeonhole yourself. And even though I've directed a lot of lighter things over the years, I feel like, my agent once said that one of the challenges of representing me was it wasn't clear what we're selling. So which I took to be a compliment.
Damn you with faint praise.
So exactly. So.
All right. Well, on that note, it is 4:59 by my clock. Michael Kandawal is saying such a great hour. Thank you. And so I'm sure I could come up with 500 other questions. I had a whole bunch from my students here we didn't get time to do. So maybe you'll come back sometime next year.
I count me in.
Okay. And now we got a taste of what kind of things you can answer. And I think we'll start, I'll start working on my students to come up with their questions well in advance. And we can do it. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank
and
you.
This is wonderful.
I loved every minute. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks. And everyone go out and buy the book. Link in chat. It's really good.